name is Brooke. I'm an L2 from Montana. First I want to just check if I talk right here, can everyone hear me okay in the back? All good? Alright. So I'm going to be talking about judging, the aspects of judging that sometimes escape public perception. And that for a lot of players and a lot of new L1s, I think a lot of people think that basically judging is sitting around and then someone raises their hand and yells judge, and then you answer that question, and then you're on break again until someone raises their hand again. And so I'm going to be going over other stuff that's involved in judging that sometimes gets missed or is less prominent, but is still important. Alright, so the first thing I want to stress that is sometimes too often not mentioned is that judging is a customer service job, and there's some things that go hand in hand with that. For example, if you've ever worked, I don't know, at McDonald's or a job along those lines, then you know that sometimes, sometimes you're going to have bad days which are not really your fault. Sometimes someone in back is going to be going slow, and then you're going to be blamed if you're working up front for ruining things. Same with judging. Sometimes Word is going to crash, and you have to re-enter all the results, and it's going to slow things down. Sometimes players spend way too long on their 5 extra turns, and everyone else is sitting around staring at you thinking it's your fault. And sometimes you have to give out a game loss or a DQ, and even if it's the right call, they're going to be holding a grudge against you personally or think you had it out to get them. And I think you just have to be aware that these things exist. But the good news on the other side of that is that it's all going to be worth it in the end. Because, judging is awesome. And you get, we don't need to go over all the reasons judging is awesome, but it's just important to remember it is a customer service position. Sometimes you have to apologize to players for things that you know in your head weren't really your fault, and just so that they can be happy so that they'll show up at the tournament the next week. So then, before the tournament even starts, what are some things that you might want to take care of if you're judging, especially if it's maybe an unfamiliar store an hour or 2 drive away? Yeah?
Meet with the TO, make sure there's enough space for the anticipated amount of people we have.
Right? Knowing the expected turnout is definitely key if you're judging.
Well, like right before, making sure it's set up, their table numbers, their printer, all of like things we actually.
Okay, making sure that they're not going to be like, oh, I thought you were bringing the printer. Do we have table tents? Definitely good. Yeah.
Talking with any of the players that happen to be there early for the event to try and get a feel for what the community is going to be like if you've never been there before.
Okay, that's a good one. Is it a really competitive crowd, or is it a lot of FNMers? Taylor.
At your own store, especially your own store, but also as opposed to cleaning up your national tables and making it look clean.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely an important aspect of judging that's not mentioned. But I'm thinking like before the tournament even starts, like the day or week before.
Talking with your other judges that will be working.
Right. What are you talking about?
Getting to know your tournament staff, figuring out who's in charge of what, who's on paper team, who's on this.
Right. So knowing everyone's roles. Yeah. Was there a hand in? Yeah, Aaron.
So if it's a new TO, you might really want to get a chance to talk to the TO and find out what their impression is of your responsibilities.
Right.
So that you and the TO are working well together.
That's definitely a big one. Figuring out, because some TOs are going to have different expectations. So sometimes if you go to a store, maybe their local judge it takes care of entering all the results slips. And if you don't know ahead of time that you're supposed to be doing that, then that's going to be an issue and maybe delay the tournament. And a lot of things along those lines. Same with, setting up table tents. Sometimes the judge is asked to do that. Sometimes the TO has it already done. And it doesn't really matter so long as everyone is on the same page about who's in charge of what.
Talking with the TO and making sure you have the appropriate amount of pricing for your event.
Getting the prizes. So that covers pretty much everything I had. Big ones were just knowing your expected hours, like your shift. What time are you supposed to be there? How late are you gonna expect to go there, which is tied to the expected turnout. Of course, things happen, but yeah.
Another thing that can be important working with the new TO is to discuss compensation beforehand, so you don't get in a situation where they have an assumption and you have an assumption, and then the tournament gets on and they're like, oh, well, so this is about $20 for running this free TO.
Right, that's definitely a big one. Yeah, it's especially if you have to travel. A lot of TOs aren't going to think about the fact that, you know, if they have a local judge who always has like a relatively fixed rate for doing a tournament, and then they ask you to drive in from 3 hours away because the other person is at a wedding or sick or whatever. Knowing the compensation ahead of time is important because you should expect something different if you're judging in your backyard than if you're driving 4 hours and have to pay for a hotel room for the night. That's just reasonable. Yeah, compensation is definitely a big one to have squared away before. Because yeah, it gets pretty awkward if you're halfway through the tournament and then they're like, I have $5 for you. Like, as a judge, you don't want to just walk out of the middle of the tournament, but that's not okay. So, anything else that people want to mention that you should take care of before the tournament even starts?
Well, more of a question on the last scenario that you brought up. What do you do if you go to judge a tournament and they end up cutting your compensation without informing you? How would you handle that?
I think that would be pretty not okay, obviously. I haven't heard of anything like that happening. If you already had an agreement with a TO before, even among people who were, you know, relatively new TOs or something, I treat judging basically as a job. You know, you're being hired for your time, for your knowledge, and your skills. And you know, if you were working any other job in the world, no one's going to be like, yeah, I don't feel like paying you what we agreed on and what's in your contract. Here's less. Like, that's not okay. And they should know that that's the same for this. Yeah.
Part of judging can be teaching your TOs, training them what to expect of judges, what they should be prepared with, they should what your job is, what their job is.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially for relatively new TOs, or maybe a TO who's been hosting, you know, X-Wing and Warhammer, but has just started to dip their toe into Magic, or something along those lines. You know, I'm not really familiar with any other games, but I assume that judging duties are slightly different for who does what along those things. So yeah, if it's a new store, or if they're not too familiar with Magic, then that's definitely a good thing to mention. Then moving on. This is one that is not specifically in any judge's duties. Like, you aren't going to get Jeremy breathing down your neck if you aren't doing this, but it can be helpful, especially if you're in a remote area where there's, you know, one store, not 7, and there's not, you know, and there's 15 players, not 70, or, you know, 2,000 or whatever. So one big thing is just making sure that the players know that the event is happening, because if players don't know, they can't show up. And that can involve just like mentioning to when you're playing F&M, just tell your opponent like, hey, did you hear about that thing next Saturday? Or you can, sometimes stores aren't on cooperative terms, and that's understandable if they're really competitive. But again, if you're living in an area like in Montana, we have 10-ish stores, and I think only one town has more than one. And so all of our stores are pretty generally cooperative. Like, they try and coordinate so that tournaments are not happening on the same day. And then when that's the situation, which is not going to be everywhere, then it's a good idea to maybe encourage TOs to make up a little flyer and send it off to the other store. And then, you know, reciprocate when it's the other store's turn. And that just lets everyone around know. And as I said, you should not feel bad if you don't have the time to do this, and as a judge, you just are like, all right, I'm gonna show up, do a tournament, and the end. But it can be helpful, because if we get larger tournaments and we get more players involved, that's just gonna be more tournaments. It's gonna just be a self-fueling cycle, and that means there's more tournaments for you to get more money at. now we've started round one, things are going. What are some things that maybe you need to take care of besides just answering a question when someone raises their hand that might get left out? Yeah.
Getting slips out.
Yeah, match slips is definitely a big one that I'm embarrassingly bad at. Yeah,
Just maintaining the tournament area, picking up trash, pushing the chairs.
great.
Anything.
Yeah, just taking care of the play area. Rock?
Going over deck lists so you can pull out any anomalies to deck check.
Yep, definitely deck lists. Was that a hand?
No,
No?
kind of, but
Yeah.
checks.
Deck checks, yeah.
I would say just being clear with your announcements, if, there's a lunch round, sometimes people forget that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
There
that's
are
a good
certain
one. Just
announcements.
making sure that the players know what's going on.
And walking around and being visible and not just standing in one area waiting for a hand to go up, but going through the rows, listening to what's going on, seeing what's going on, and just keeping apprised of what's happening in the tournament and in various matchups that
Yeah,
can
that's,
solve problems before they start because you catch something before it goes down.
yep, that's definitely a big one. Just making sure that you can, that you can be seen and players know you're there and you're, walking between the tables, not standing there looking at the singles in the case, thinking about what you're gonna do with your compensation. That's maybe not the best thing. Yeah,
Monitoring time.
monitoring time, right, making sure the players know, what's left in the round. So, let's see. Yeah, I call this the parts of a Magic tournament that aren't about Magic at all. Making sure, do we have enough elbow room? Like, if you get fewer players than you expected, a lot of times what I like to do is spread out the table numbers, like during round 1 or 2, and that way you could be using all the space and making sure everyone has enough elbow room to get their groove on. And that's just going to make a better experience for everyone. Same, can make players get to the pairings? Can they see them easily? That's going to increase players' happiness with an event a lot. And so you can print 2 or 3 or 4 copies of standings if you have to. Or just looking around a room before it actually starts and thinking about congestion and maybe trying to put the standings, like here I put them at the front or the back, maybe not against this wall because there's not a lot of space around the edge there and players are going to be bumping into each other. And then the clock timer, which was mentioned. Any other ideas for during the middle of the tournament? Yeah.
Occasionally you'll have tournaments that are in multiple rooms, and making sure that you give coverage to both rooms, or however many rooms there are there. It's difficult to do when you're the only judge at the tournament, but you need to be even more mobile.
Yep.
Because there are a lot of questions backing up, moving the room, that there are a lot of questions you won't get because you weren't right there and they didn't want to bother you.
Yep, definitely. Being around, I think being visible is a large part of it because a lot of times players, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable just yelling judge and pulling you in from the back of the room or the next room over or what have you. But if you're walking up and down the tables and they see you're 2 feet away, then they'll be like, oh, hey, Judge, we have a question. So yeah, definitely. You have one?
I was gonna say, sorry, I just forgot what I was gonna say. Just in terms of where you have like the event, you need to make sure that people have room. Sometimes as the tournament progresses, maybe you have more players in a room space than you would prefer, but you can make it work. But then as the event goes on, you have players drop. Renumbering tables to give player space is something that players can often be very appreciative of. It takes effort to go through and renumber the tables during lunch round or whatever, but trying to give players as much space as you can when you have tight quarters as the day progresses is something that can be very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. Yeah, I had mentioned, doing it that when you maybe get fewer people than expected, spreading that out so that they're still using maybe all the available space. But that's a good point too. Players drop as rounds go longer, and so you're going to be able to do that later in the day as well. And then we mentioned just remembering that this is a customer service job. You want to make sure the players are happy. So push in chairs, pick up trash, and of course, push in chairs. then one other big thing I try to do is just speak with the players. You know, when there's maybe a couple matches left, then yeah, you should be watching that. But you know, say you're working an event with 3 judges and there's 1 match left. You probably don't need all 3 judges sitting down watching this one match. You know, 1 or even 2 is gonna be fine. And then you can have someone else around and just like talk to the other players. You know, is there anything that this tournament could have been doing differently that you would appreciate? You know, can you see the standings, right? And that's a good way to get feedback, and just letting players know that you are open to feedback and that you respect their opinion and you're trying to work for them is gonna be big. And then also just answering questions. A lot of times people will say, oh, I had a question about this rules interaction from my EDH game 2 weeks ago. Tell me how that works. Or I was wondering about this judge call I heard at my last tournament. That's going to be another common one. And just, you know, opening up lines of communication. Just talk to the players and see what's on their minds. Then the actually magic parts of a tournament. This is things that I'm looking for when I'm walking around the tables that, you know, waiting for someone to raise their hand and yell judge. First of all, are spells being legally cast? If someone casts a 5-mana spell, do we actually have 5 mana tapped? Is it the right colors? If something says deal 5 damage to that creature, and the creature's a 5/5, are we actually gonna like deal it 5, or are we trying to deal it 4 and then let it live? Combat phase is a big thing I'm watching for when I'm walking up and down the tables, because I've found in my experience that the combat phase is where a lot of judge questions come up, and it's always better if you're watching the event happen than if you get called over after. So if I'm watching a table right here, and there's a couple people just in their main phase thinking, and then in one corner, one guy's going deep in the tank, and then they turn 15 creatures sideways, and the other person is starting to line up 13 blockers, that's probably where you should be watching, more than someone just being like, I'm gonna cast Baneslayer, go. Because that's gonna be, a lot of people have questions about, how does double strike work? When do I have to order blockers? What happens if I giant growth, and so on. The combat phase is just always gonna be a very complicated piece, and it's easy for players to get confused there more than other places. Anyone have other ideas for, during the tournament, the actually magic parts of the tournament? What are you watching for? When you're looking up and down the tables, how do you decide, I'm gonna watch that match more than this one right now? Yeah.
Collusion or cheating?
Yup, that's definitely a good thing to be on the, I have an eye out for. So where in a tournament are you gonna look for that?
Well, during matches and also by when they put up standings.
Mm-hmm. As standings. Are you worried about it in round 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Where are you worried about it?
Towards the end when they actually start posting.
All right. And what kind of tables do you think are most likely to do that?
The higher end,
Right.
top 8 potentials.
Right, the top 8 potentials. In my experience, the people most likely to be trying to, rules lawyer their opponents or sideboard for game 1 or otherwise get away with something are the people right below the very top tables, but still in top 8 contention. Because if you think about, a 6-round tournament, 7-round tournament, whatever, the top 1 or 2 tables, however many, are just able to draw in, shake hands, the end. But it's the next group of people who are still in contention if they win, and if they lose, they're out. In my experience, those are the people most likely to accidentally mulligan to 7, or to fetch for the wrong land, or what have you. Flebstrand into Celestial Colonnade, that sort of thing. Those are the people you want to watch the most. So yeah, absolutely right. Thought I saw, yeah.
Body language and tone as you go through a match. You see somebody all tense, and because they're frustrated with what's going on. Being there to be able to help alleviate is probably a good idea. Or if somebody's starting to get louder and more frustrated, keeping an eye on that match to make sure nothing bad happens is probably better than watching the one where both players are just laughing, joking, and continuing on.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We're watching for body language and, are players doing okay, or are they just laughing and joking, or are they, about to start cursing? Yeah.
Looking for decks or specific cards that usually end up having rules questions about them, whether because they're complicated or have weird interactions with other cards.
That's a good point. Yeah, watch more for the humility deck than for the grizzly bears and lightning bolts deck, for sure. Yeah.
Especially true when running local regular events, but can come up at any event. Keeping an eye on newer, less experienced players and being more involved in their matches, because they are both less likely to know how to resolve a situation and less likely to want to ask for help.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's unfortunate, but generally true in my experience. The people who are, brand new to a tournament scene or brand new to FNM, maybe don't even know that they can call a judge. And the people most in need of it are the people least likely to do it. So just letting people know, you can call a judge. And trying to figure out, this is a person in their first tournament, maybe I should watch them a little more. All right, I just got 5 minutes, so I'm gonna move along a little faster. Other things I'm watching for when I'm watching a game, things like one land a turn, mulliganing down and not back to the same, and fetch lands are frequent places where players are going to try to get away with something, or easy places to make an honest mistake. And so these are just things that to be watching for when you're watching a match. Then one big thing I wanted to mention, because I think a lot of people are not doing this enough, is counting cards. Like when I'm watching a match, I'll try to count cards in hand plus so on, lands, creatures, etc., and making sure that they're adding up to within one of each other. And so the big thing to remember is if they're one off, that's not a problem. If I start, I'm on 7, my opponent draws for the turn, they're on 8. We have a 1 card discrepancy, but there's no problem. And then it's back to my turn, I'm at 8, then they're at 9. So they should be either tied or within 1. The big thing to remember is don't bother trying to count things like Electrolyze, Serum Vision, Spreading Seas, a fetch land. Just don't count those. And big thing I also want to stress is this is something to try to watch for, because it's a good way to catch if someone mulligans to 8, or if someone has drawn an extra for the turn or what have you. But don't bother if their graveyards are 30 cards deep. That's going to be way more time than it's worth. But something like if you see someone mulligan and then a second later they're both an equal number of cards, then maybe you want to ask a question. Same if cards are within 1, then like I said, there's not a problem. But if you see that there's a 2 or 3 card discrepancy, my first question is always just, hey guys, can you tell me if there were any mulligans this game? And if they say, oh yeah, my opponent mulled 4, then you're all good. But if they say no, and you've counted one player is 3 cards up on the other, then you probably want to pause them and ask a couple more questions. Then anything else that people want to mention about things to be doing when you're not, actively answering a question? Yeah.
The big thing I ran into is making sure people are properly communicating with each other. There are times where I'll walk up to a table and one person will have the score 20 to 15, the other person will have 20 to 5.
Okay, yeah.
So you need to make sure that they're properly communicating what the current live total is, how many cards you have in hand, things of that nature.
Communication in general, and then also just while you're walking up and down the tables, is being, checking life pads and making sure that they seem to, jive. So I guess the big takeaway I have is that judging is a job, treat it as such. You aren't going to show up to your first day at a real job if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, if you don't know what you're getting paid for it. Just make sure that you also know that for when you're judging a tournament. You should, same as a job, you should always be doing something. Don't be sitting around and looking in the case when it's the middle of a round and figuring out what you're supposed to do with your comp. Because players are going to be watching you all the time, and they're going to be judging you while you're judging them. And if they think that you're just looking at singles, then they're going to feel a lot more inclined to cheat because they think they're more likely to get away with it. Staying in the play area and watching matches is a good way to prevent cheating before it happens, because they're just going to think, they're less likely to try if they think they're going to be caught. And if you play any tournaments, or even if you don't play tournaments, and you're just playing a regular Commander game or whatever, think about what you like when you're playing. For me as a player, I'm infuriated if I cannot see the round clock from where I am. Maybe it's my fault because I always just play dirtily blue control decks, but I need to know how much time is in the round, and I play based on that at times. Like, sometimes you just have to press the gas. You think about, I like having elbow room, so when I'm judging, what can I do to give my players more elbow room at times? Any final questions, comments? All right, well, thank you all for your time and attention, and we're at time, so someone else is here.